everybody, and welcome back to the Spellbinder channel. My name is Robin, aka Spells, and today is a bit of a spooky day. Hopefully Halloween if I can get my timings right. Either way, I figured I should make things a bit spooky, and well, what's spookier than looking at this large piece of ice that I found? And while we're gazing at this big old popsicle, I can try and entertain by reading out some facts about one of the scariest movies from the early 2000s. That's right, the Blair Witch Project. So, a little about the Iceberg video before we get right into the thick of it all. I've made 5 tiers. The first is the most basic of basics, the Blair Witch stuff that's made it mainstream. This tier is perfect if you don't really know anything about the Blair Witch and just want a basic crash course. The second tier is dedicated to the lesser known Blair Witch projects. This tier is perfect if you already enjoy or are interested in the mainstream Blair Witch stuff and want a way to start experiencing more of the universe. There's also some lost meaning there for the fans of that stuff. The third tier is dedicated to some outside media and behind-the-scenes content. This means parodies, unused content from the movies, and the like. This tier is the best if you're just a fan of trivia. Then we have the fourth tier, which is dedicated to the lore and the theories. This is for if you want to hear all the dark stories that the Blair Witch Project and its fans have to offer. Lastly, we have the fifth tier, and a bit of a backstory to this one. See, I took major inspiration from some Iceberg charts on Reddit, one by u/abandonedxearth, and the other by u/plaththesalt. However, I did do a bunch of tweaking, whether it be taking some stuff out, adding some new stuff in, or combining stuff together. However, this means that there was some stuff I just straight out configured. And that all goes down there. Though, luckily, there wasn't too much of that. This tier is perfect for those that are way more knowledgeable about this stuff and would like to tell me what they're about. Please and thank you. One last thing before we hop into it, bit of a content warning. The Blair Witch is a series involving ghosts and demons and the like, which will all be brought up pretty consistently throughout the video. But in all honesty, the vibes here are going to be chill and at max a Goosebumps book level of spooky. So, with that out of the way, let's do a friggin' iceberg. The Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project is the movie that started it all. Released in January of 1999 by directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Ed Sanchez, it stars Heather Donahue, Micah Williams, and Joshua Leonard as they mess about in a forest until the forest starts messing back. The film was a critical and financial success, the Blair Witch Project odd filming style. One of the things most well known about the Blair Witch nowadays is in the unusual way its first film was made. What the directors did is they got 3 main actors and set them out into the woods for 8 full days, only to occasionally give them little drop boxes which included notes on what their characters should be doing, and also food. They would also mess with and spook the main trio throughout the days, doing stuff such as placing rocks outside their tents, shaking their tents, making spooky noises in the background, and the like. There's a lot of interesting stories about how the Blair Witch was filmed, and if you want to see more of that, there is a video by FactFiend all about it. Link in the description. The Blair Witch Project on promotional style. Another famous bit of trivia about the original Blair Witch movie is how it was promoted, with the line between what was fictional and what was fact being intentionally blurred. This led to situations like a bunch of people giving Heather's real mother sympathy cards, because these fans were people that were genuinely concerned that the cast of the first movie was either dead or missing. Which, to be fair, the movie's first posters were missing posters for the cast that played things entirely straight, fully dedicated to the claim that the movie wasn't a fiction story, but instead found footage from a real event. Speaking of found footage genre. Found footage is a genre in which the main characters are recording the events of the film in an attempt to make the movie feel more real, which is why it's usually seen in horror. Despite popular belief, the Blair Witch Project technically is not the first found footage horror. That title belongs to a 1989 film called The McPherson Tapes. The film was directed by Dean Alioto and is generally not super well praised, with only a 5.4 out of 10 on IMDb. However, the Blair Witch did have a huge impact on the found footage genre, as it was many people's first real exposure to the genre. and it showed people that the genre could lead to financial success despite being cheap to make, which sort of ruined the horror movies for a while, but oh well. Book of Shadows, The Blair Witch 2. After the massive success of the first movie, a sequel was pretty quickly made. Released in late October of the year 2000 by director Joe Berlinger, the movie was absolutely panned by critics, and today it is still seen as a pretty bad movie. Perhaps this is in small part because it lost the found footage angle the first film had, and it acted closer to a traditional horror film. The only thing I ever see being praised in this movie nowadays is Kim Director's character, the goth Kim Diamond. The plot is that a bunch of fans of the Blair Witch movie get together and head to the forest, where hijinks and murders ensue. Personally, I think it's a bit of a mess, sure, but it's fun, and it does have some really cool concepts, such as the Blair Witch Project being a real film in universe, and the way the main cast gets messed with, especially at the end. Blair Witch 2016. Another Blair Witch movie released in, you guessed it, 2016. The film was directed by Adam Wingard and acts as a sequel to specifically the original movie, and returns to the found footage genre, as it focuses on Heather Donahue's brother, Jack Donahue, as they all return to the forest that started it all, which of course leads to more reality warping shenanigans. I watched this movie at the end of a binge of all three movies, so maybe that affected my opinions, but of the three movies, it's the one I am least likely to recommend. Though I do think the tunnel scene near the end of the film is probably the single scariest individual scene in the trilogy. The Blair Witch Game 2020. Developed by Bloober Team and directed by Matthias Lennart, the game is about a completely different story taking place in the main Blair Witch forest. It's about a man's search for a person who went missing in the forest, and things proceed to get really weird, even for Blair Witch. It's pretty mediocre, with a 7 out of 10 on Steam. I can't give too much insight because I never really played the game for myself, but I did try watching a Let's Play at one point, and I remember the game being intensely boring. But it does have a dog, so that's cool. On to Tier 2, Less Known Projects and Lost Media. Blair Witch websites. One of the main pieces of promotion for the original Blair Witch film was this website, and it featured things like the missing persons poster for the Blair Witch Trio, and also a mythology section which contains the series' first proper lore dump. Unfortunately, the website can no longer be accessed via normal means. However, if you use the Wayback Machine, you can still look around at all the site had to offer. Later on, another site would be made, this time for Book of Shadows. It's titled Blair Witch Hunt, and it's supposed to be made by one of the protagonists of the film, Jeff Patterson. Though it's not really as charming as the first site, there are a few more websites, but that'll be addressed later. Blair Witch mockumentaries. Alongside the first movie were two mockumentaries, Curse of the Blair Witch and Sticks and Stones, an exploration of the Blair Witch. These are both in the style of the first few opening minutes of the original Blair Witch, focusing in on interviews. This goes into some more detail about the history of the Blair Witch and her forest. These movies also commit to the bit of pretending it's all real. Curse of the Blair Witch especially seemed to give some credibility to the first film, because it released a bit prior to the film, which really got a lot of the audience to start questioning what was going on. Following this, two more mockumentaries would be released. One would be called The Massacre of the Burkittsville 7, The Blair Witch Legacy, and this one would follow something briefly mentioned by the first film, that being the murders of Rustin Parr, who we'll get to later. And the next was called Shadow of the Blair Witch, and this one focused on the events following the Book of Shadows. The Blair Witch Dossiers. So, in 1999 and in the year 2000, two novels were made, The Blair Witch Project, The Dossier, and Blair Witch Book of Shadows, respectively. They were both written by D.A. Stern, who also acts as an in-universe character, being a supposed expert on the occult, which explains why he's writing about the Blair Witch, as these books also pretend as though the events of the first movie were entirely real, and it goes way more in depth about the lore of the stories via individual scenes of random interviews, photographs, emails, and the like, which focus more and more on the supernatural as time goes on. I flipped through the first one a bit. I think it's pretty fun to flip through and read the little scattered bits here and there. Plus, there's some nice lore dumps at the end. The Blair Witch Game Trilogy. Despite people only really knowing the 2019 game, back in 2000, 3 games were released, with each game focusing on a different part of the lore. The first game was called Blair Witch Volume 1, Rust and Parr. This one was made by Terminal Reality. The second was titled Blair Witch Volume 2, The Legend of Coffin Rock, which was made by Human Head Studios. And finally, there's Blair Witch Volume 3, The Ellie Kedward Trial. That was made by Ritual Entertainment. Being that they are 3 entire video games, and I've got a whole lot of Iceberg to cover, there's not much detail I can go into right now, but there is a video titled The Forgotten Blair Witch Games by the channel Fraud Department if you want to get a more in-depth look at the games. Link in the description below. The Blair Witch Files. The Blair Witch Files is a series of young adult novels centered around Heather Donahue's cousin, Cade. This is another situation where I've only dabbled with the first one, but it seems like something I would have really liked as a teen, back when I was obsessed with things like Goosebumps. Perhaps if you are into Goosebumps or, like, the FNAF books, this might be up your alley. Oh, and fun fact, Cade is also canonically the person who made the original Blair Witch website, D.A. Stern Original Novels. Our boring Stern is back at it again, following the same occult expert as the dossiers. This is another, more traditional style book, kinda like the Blair Witch Files. However, the books Blair Witch Secret Confessions of Rust and Parr and Blair Witch Graveyard Shift seem to skew more towards an older audience, as the first one focuses on the frankly gnarly murders of Rust and Parr. But again, we'll get into all that later. There is also a photo novel of The Confessions of Rust and Parr made by Claire Forbes. Blair Witch Comics. Blair Witch Comics. They exist. There's some pretty interesting stories, with most of the comics being anthologies, and there's some great artwork in there. There's a review video titled Blair Witch, The Blair Witch Project Comic Review by The Horror Show, so if you want to find out more. Once again, link in the description. Todd McFarlane Toys. The first interpretation of what the Blair Witch actually looked like comes in the form of a toy by Todd McFarlane. Here it is on screen. It's pretty much considered lame and underwhelming by anyone I've ever seen talk about it, and I've got to agree. A lot of the appeal of the Blair Witch is that you don't actually see her, so there's not much point in, seeing her. The Trial of Ellie Kedward. The third website is a complete curveball compared to the last two, which, while they only had some text on the screen and maybe some images, the Trial of Ellie Kedward site has a full-on original video series, which clearly have a pretty decent budget behind them, as the in-universe story behind these videos is that they're sort of like a History Channel style documentary video, but based on the journal of Ellie Kedward, who was the girl that would later become the Blair Witch. I honestly don't know what to make of this one. It is the closest thing there is to a proper Blair Witch show, but I really didn't enjoy it. Mainly because Ellie Kedward's story isn't something that needed to be told in the first place, and the documentary style of the show, it's really off-putting. And to be honest, there's some scenes within it that I don't feel too comfortable talking about on YouTube. And all those scenes do, they're just needless, and they provide nothing but shock and disgust. I skipped this one, to be honest with you. Josh's Blair Witch Mixtape. For whatever reason, they made a mixtape that's supposed to be by Josh. It features songs like God is God by Liebeck, The Cellar by Antonio Cora, and 10 other songs. I didn't listen to it, but it exists. Rust and Parr, Never Given. The fourth website. This one focuses on Rustin Parr, in case you need to read up on the murders that he did. Because, boy howdy, Blair Witch sure does like keep going back to Rustin Parr, for whatever reason. The Crybaby Bridge video. Over on woodsmovie.com, which is yet another Blair Witch website, though this one does drop the act and admits the whole thing is a fake, so it isn't too much worth talking about on its own right, especially since it's hard to use now that it's only accessible by the Wayback Machine. However, it does include the Crybaby Bridge video, which is a full 20-minute video that acts as a precursor to the events of the Blair Witch. If I had to guess, this was probably footage that was going to end up in one of the documentaries, but ended up scrapped for whatever reason. This video is a really cool novelty with just how much extra Blair Witch footage that I believe wasn't accessible for about 10 years until the website came out. It isn't as scary as the original because they aren't in the woods, but it's cool to see just how well they captured the vibes of the original movie, as it shows the main trio looking into another strange event, this time revolving around a crybaby bridge with a dark backstory revolving around the clan of all things. Lost Amazon exclusive deleted scene. According to the Lost Media Wiki, there is a partially lost scene of a Blair Witch Project deleted scene that could originally be accessed via Amazon. However, Amazon eventually took it down, which is an odd choice considering you can still watch all the Blair Witch movies on Amazon Prime, or that's how I watch them anyways. But anyway, there is a video on YouTube that has at least some of the scene. It's titled The Blair Witch Project Deleted Scene Motel Poetry, which was posted by a channel called Delta. The scene is just the main trio hanging out in a motel, so it makes sense why the scene was scrapped. And that was Tier 2. Fun fact, the phrase Blair Witch has already been uttered 67 times, including just now, and we're only halfway through this thing. Which means it's about time we get started on to Tier 3, outside media and behind the scenes content. Blair Witch parody films. Being popular in the early 2000s could only lead to one thing: parodies. There's a standard adult film parody in the form of The Erotic Witch Project, but there's some odder ones like the Tony Blair Witch Project, which asks the question of what if the Blair Witch was actually the then Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair. There's also the Bogus Witch Project, which seems to be a generic spoof of the Blair Witch, with the entire Wikipedia page for the film solely focusing on how terrible the movie is. Another parody is The Blair Witch Mountain, which includes the cast of Return to Witch Mountain, which had a fun enough execution for a short. Lastly, and potentially even leastly if the competition wasn't so close, is The Blair Thumb, which is The Blair Witch if all the characters were thumbs. And people wonder why parody movies aren't around anymore. The Scooby-Doo Project. Also a parody of The Blair Witch, but this one is my favorite, so it gets its own thing. It was officially made by Cartoon Network, so it's well made and well animated. It follows the Scooby-Doo gang in a situation pretty similar to the original Blair Witch movie. It's a charming little experience, and it's all on YouTube if you ever want to go through it. Four Corners of Fear. I really struggled with figuring out where to put this one, because I don't think this counts as actual Blair Witch content, but it was still made by Ed Sanchez, director of the first film. Co-director. I think this could be described almost as a bit of a spiritual successor that acts as a parody of what a sequel to the original movie could be. It's a fun series that fans of the original project should check out, which isn't too hard since it's all on YouTube. The Blair Witch Legacy. Not a parody this time, but a bona fide fan film. It's all free on YouTube on the channel Kings of Horror. It does its best to feel like an actual sequel to the original, and a link to it will be in the description below. Axon, Witchcraft Throughout the Ages. This movie is listed here for being one of the main inspirations for the original Blair Witch Project, so much so that it inspired the name of the Blair Witch Project's production company, made specifically for the Blair Witch Project. It's titled Haxon Films, by the way. Haxon is a 1922 film that got essentially a remaster in 1968, as it's given a narration and jazz musical score. The film is a proper documentary focusing on how disease and mental illness can lead to witch hunts. Similar to the Blair Witch Project, it seems pretty bare bones nowadays, but it was really impressive for the time and a lot of the art holds up. The entire movie is free on YouTube if you want to check it out. The Black Hills Project. The Black Hills Project was the original working name for the Blair Witch Project. The Woods. The Woods is a title briefly used by Blair Witch 2016, mostly just so that when the film festival goers saw the movie, they could do a bait and switch and go, "Joke's on you, Buster, you weren't actually watching the original film." Boom. Whereabouts of the original 16mm camera. Unsure exactly what the original Reddit Iceberg meant by this one. The Blair Witch was mostly shot on a 16mm camera and an HI8 camcorder. If we're talking fiction, the footage was found underneath the abandoned house the first film ends in, and then later ends up in the hands of the police, and then Heather's mom, Angie Donahue, who gives it to a fictionalized version of Haxon Films. But if we're talking reality, it's probably just in some box somewhere, if not completely disposed of after all these years. Blair Witch 3 Defunct Contest. Announced via one of the Blair Witch Files books, this is a little insight into how there was going to be a third Blair Witch film shortly after the release of Book of Shadows. The contest was a simple writing contest, where the prompt was to write about one's own encounter with the supernatural in 150 words or less. Considering the many years between this contest actually happening and the release of Blair Witch 2016, it's safe to say the winner never actually got their prize of getting to go to the set of Blair Witch 3. Alternate endings. Same with most films, the Blair Witch Project had workshopped some different ideas for the ending. They all stay mostly true to the ending we did see, however Mike's fate was changed up here and there, with there being ideas of him either being crucified on one of the sticks or hung by a rope. FX TV Cut. When the Blair Witch Project released on the TV channel FX, it apparently had a special cut, but I couldn't find any info on what was so special about it. Blair Witch Project's Missing Monster. So, because of the odd methods of the original film, there was a part where Heather was supposed to capture a figure in the distance. However, Heather, the actor, took the more sensible approach and yelled and sprinted away without ever actually capturing the figure on camera. It's a real shame too, because apparently the guy that scared Heather would soon later fall into a puddle. Chewbacca. Chewbacca is a name given to one of the Blair Witch stick bundles by the crew, because it had fur and leaves on it. It also makes a brief cameo in Four Corners of Fear. Seneca State Creek Park. The state park located within the Black Hills Forest, where the Blair Witch Project was shot. Lonnie Glarum. Lonnie Glarum was a key production assistant on the Blair Witch Project and worked on stills photography for Curse of the Blair Witch. They're notable because they filmed Heather briefly at the start of the film. Mike's Confession. In a deleted scene from the Blair Witch Project, it's a heartbreaking scene that I kinda wish was kept in the original film. It has Heather and Mike talking about how they believe they are going to die, and Mike records a bit where, in the case his family finds the footage, he tells his family that he loves them. He also reassures Heather that the events of the movie weren't her fault. Patricia DeCou's only acting credit. Patricia DeCou is in the Blair Witch Project as one of the people the main trio interviews. As the title suggests, this interview was her only ever acting role, at least according to IMDb. For a first try at it, she did a good job, though unfortunately she passed away in 2007, MIA in IMDb. This is in reference to how the main trio of actors in The Blair Witch Project were listed as missing or presumed dead on IMDb right before the movie was released, which was an intentional marketing move as it helped convince people that the events of the movie were real. The Secret of Ezra Vere, a featurette that clues people in to try and rewatch bits and pieces of Book of Shadows in reverse in order to get secret messages and stuff. What those messages were will be talked about later. Heather in the 2016 film. While this didn't end up happening, there were plans for Heather to end up in the 2016 film, though Heather declined, stating her reasoning was because she regretted using her full name in the original film, and the 2016 film even kept her name mostly out of the film in order to respect her wishes. The Real Book of Shadows. The Blair Witch 2 got its subtitle with the help of a real book made by real Wiccans. The TLDR of the book is that it contains religious texts as well as instructions for certain magical rituals. While the movie never outright references the book within the movie, it does refer back to the Wiccan religion quite often. The Dreary Black Hills. The Dreary Black Hills is an old folk song by Jim Ringer and Mary McCaslin. It's not made for the Blair Witch, but it's kinda tied to it by the use of the phrase Black Hills. Good song. The Real Blair Witch. The Real Blair Witch is a real documentary about the criminal acts done due to people trying to replicate the filming style of The Blair Witch Project, in which half the cast starts to genuinely torment this one girl. There's a video on it by the channel Blame It on George that will be linked below if you want to get all the details, but quick warning because the video gets real dark real quick. And on that somber note, Tier 3 is now done, with the words Blair Witch now being uttered another 37 times for a total of 104 times. Next up is going to be the tier with the most entries. Luckily for me though, I won't have to watch any extra movie or proof of concept series or parody or what have you. But with that out of the way, let's get to the lore and fan theories. Heather, Mike, and Josh. The main trio of the Blair Witch Project that, due to the request of Heather, wandered out into the woods only to eventually get lost, all while being tormented by the legendary Blair Witch. The trio are all film students. There's not much to say about Mike and Josh, but Heather is notable for being someone with an interest in the occult, and in her journal she talks about how she feels a sort of kinship with the Blair Witch. The Black Hills Forest. A real forest within Maryland, and will probably be in the background for a lot of my shots if editing goes how I planned. The forest is notable for being where the original Blair Witch Project takes place, both within the context of reality and fiction. The Griggs House. The Griggs House is the real name for the house where the original Blair Witch Project ended. The house was unfortunately demolished, despite the attempts of fans to keep it up. In universe, the house belonged to someone named Rustin Parr. White Enamel. A name for a lost movie only ever released in the Blair Witch universe. It focuses on Kyle Brody, the only child to survive the Rustin Parr murders. Rustin Parr murders. In 1969, a man named Rustin Parr kidnapped 8 children and murdered 7 of them. Rustin Parr would turn himself into the police, saying he did what he did because a woman told him to do so. Seek me no further. The full line of "Seek me no further or the children will walk free again" is a threat from the Blair Witch given to the cast of Book of Shadows through random flashes across the screen during a campfire scene. Essentially, the witch is saying that they should head back or she'll have the spirits of the children, I presume the ones killed by Russ and Parr, start to mess with the Book of Shadows gang. Genesis 31:52. In, yet again, the Blair Witch Project, Heather makes a reference to a Bible quote after seeing a bunch of rocks. It makes more sense in context, I promise. Anyway, the bit she's referring to is Genesis 31:52, which according to the King James Bible goes, "This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm." The 2016 monster's identity. Despite most people assuming the monster at the end of Blair Witch 2016 is, in fact, the Blair Witch, the director of the film, Adam Wingard, confirmed that it was not, and the monster was, in actuality, a past victim of the Blair Witch. Sure. Mary Brown was the witch. Many people suspected that Mary Brown, who was Patricia DeCue's character from earlier, was actually the Blair Witch. While Mary's character is a bit of an odd one, according to the dossier, it seems like she earnestly wants to help people, so I personally don't subscribe to this theory. 50 to 60 year victim gap. Pretty self-explanatory. The Blair Witch only goes out and does her attacks about every 50-60 years, which is probably why not everyone who enters the Black Hills Forest, such as the main Blair Witch Trio's search party, Heather's camera in the 2016 film. Another self-explanatory title, you can briefly see what appears to be Heather's camera in the 2016 film, while the 2016 gang is rummaging through Russ and Parr's house. I assume this is because of the weird time travel aspects of the 2016 film, as technically the camera should be with Haxon Films and Angie Donahue, as mentioned earlier. Coffin Rock. Coffin Rock is a place often mentioned in the Blair Witch mythos. It has a storied history, starting off when a young boy from a Native American tribe was taken by a dark force known as a Hecatomic demon. While warriors from the tribe did try and help the boy, they all eventually failed, and the whole tribe would end up going missing. Later on, in 1886, another young boy named Robin Weaver would go missing. While Robin would end up being found and fine, a search party for him was massacred, and the bodies were laid on Coffin Rock when found. Finally, Coffin Rock is the place the Blair Witch Project trio were hiking to before all the hijinks in that movie ensued. Ellie Kedward. Ellie Kedward was the witch who would eventually become the Blair Witch. She had a real bad life, constantly trying to avoid people because people kept accusing her of witchcraft. I mean, to be fair, they were kinda right, but still. Eileen Treacle. According to the Blair Witch Files, Eileen Treacle was drowned in a river by a ghostly white hand. This happened in like 1825, so it's not all too relevant to the main story, but she does do a bit of her own haunting in the Blair Witch Files book, The Drowning Ghost. The Blair Witch Cult. The Blair Witch Cult is an in-universe book published in 1809 that gives a big ol' lore dump about Ellie Kedward. However, in modern day, only one copy remains, and that copy is pretty badly damaged. The Witch's Alphabet. I believe this was mentioned in Book of Shadows, but the Witch's Alphabet is an actual thing, primarily in Wicca. It's also known as the Theban alphabet. It doesn't have too much importance on the story of Blair Witch, though. Okay, so this is future Robin. I found another example of the Theban alphabet, and that in the original Blair Witch Project pitch, which I didn't realize was accessible until way after I finished most of this video. But it's really cool, and you can see the Haxon references up in center. So consider this the honorary original Blair Witch Project pitch slot. Mike and Josh killed Heather. A popular fan theory, with the most notable video on it being from Film Theory, the theory states that there's no actual magic going on in the Blair Witch Project, and it's in reality just Mike and Josh messing with Heather. There is a tad bit of evidence for this, most notably in Heather's journal and in Mike and Josh's odd actions. However, there is clearly still a supernatural element, so I personally believe that while Mike and Josh might have done something, it was only because they were being manipulated by the Blair Witch. Which lines up real well with what happens in Book of Shadows, actually. There's also a theory that Josh acted alone and killed both Mike and Heather, which, sure, maybe. There was no witch. This ties in with the previous one, where there's no witch, and instead either the trio's getting messed with by rednecks or something along those lines. However, considering all the following Blair Witch material released, it's pretty clear that there is a witch. Fun theory, though. The witch's powers. It's not super clear everything the Blair Witch can do, but her main method of messing with people is by shifting the forest, whether that's physically or enacting time shenanigans to send people to the past or future. She also seems to have some sort of level of control over anybody who dies in the forest. Russ and Parr in Book of Shadows. Russ and Parr briefly makes an appearance in Book of Shadows. It's a very quick or you'll miss it type moment, but there he is. I'm not sure why he's there, as I'm pretty sure he's been executed by now. But oh well, details. Who needs them? The house burned down in 1941, in reference to Russ and Parr's house, which was burned down whenever he got executed. This is why the sheriff of Burkittsville believes the tapes that the Blair Witch Project trio left behind were faked, thinking they must have rebuilt it for whatever reason. The real reason the house is back up is entirely unknown, though one must assume it's ghost shenanigans. The stick figures are portals. The Blair Witch stick figures are portals. This is outright confirmed in, I believe, one of the first 3 games. But basically, Blair Witch uses these sticks to confine people to the forest. Alright, we're mostly done. And now it's just the stuff on the 2 original icebergs that I couldn't quite figure out. Starting out with the word lost in quotations, it was too vague to find what the iceberg was referring to. Next is the salad cut, which I'm pretty sure is a specific type of cut for the original Blair Witch, but beyond that I don't really know. After that is American folklore before the pioneers, which might be referring to that story from earlier with the Hecatomic Demon and the Native American tribe, but I can't be positive. Lastly is just the name Karen, which I don't even have a proper guess at, besides maybe being a character in one of the books. But now that's every entry of the iceberg. This franchise has a huge depth that most people, even fans, seem pretty unaware of, but I hope I could bring to light some of the interesting things that this franchise has to offer. Oh, and the total Blair Witch count ended at 138. Happy Halloween, everyone!